Welcome, everybody. My name is Jim Tincher. Pleased to be here today with Ricardo as we talk about how the world makes supplier contract decisions. Really about how does customer experience drive growth in the manufacturing and distribution sector. So again, I'm Jim Tincher, founder of Heart of the Customer and overall CX and especially manufacturing geek. Prior to this, I led customer experience programs in Best Buy United Health Group. Was on the board of the CXPA, now lead research for the Customer Experience Professional Association, author of 2 books, most notably probably Do B2B Better. And, number of lists, it was fun to get the ICMI's Lifetime Achievement Award earlier this year. So that's a little bit about me, but the star of the show is Ricardo. Ricardo, tell us about yourself.
Hi, thank you, Jim, and good day, everyone. Ricardo Porta, I lead customer experience at Dow, a material science company operating in the chemical industry sector. 25 years in industry, covered a variety of roles, operations, supply chain, and manufacturing. And in the last 5-6 years, I've been working within the commercial space, driving the customer centricity pillar of Dow Ambition, which is to become the most customer-centric, innovative, sustainable, and inclusive material science company in the world. Basically, my job is to translate that ambition statement on customer centricity into tangible action, experiences, and ultimately business results. In addition to that role, I typically also run a variety of transformational programs for the enterprise, from digital transformation, commercial transformation. So a pleasure to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
Excellent. A few notes before we get started. First of all, if you have comments, please, or questions, please put them in the chat. We will see them. We're about a minute ahead of you, so it'll take us a minute or two to see them and react. But we can react as we go, or we'll also have time at the end. But please chat in here any questions and say hi right now so I know you're out there. Secondly, those who have read Do B2B Better, or those who have met me, know that I'm a big data geek. I just want to say that started with Ricardo. We worked with him back about 6 years ago. He taught me a ton about the role of operational and behavioral data in customer experience. That's why it's just always fun to work with him on projects. And so today we're going to share some of the work that really he led on AMCX. I had a secondary role, but we'll talk a little bit about that here. So let's start by, Ricardo, tell us, what does AMCX stand for? What's it all about? Give us more of a background there.
Sure. AMCX is the acronym of Advanced Manufacturing Customer Experience Consortium. And it's basically something that we started at Dow in 2020, probably the worst time ever because it was the week before COVID came on stage. So we went a bit on freeze for a couple of years, but we have gone back to it since, and it's now grown in a community of over 50, we are actually 53 as I speak, 53 large B2B manufacturing companies that agreed to come together, share experiences, share information, and benchmark performance against each other. Our goal as a consortium is really to advance the art and science of understanding, measuring, improving customer experience to the benefit of our industry, our customers, and our bottom lines. Really, as a consortium, we have short-term, mid-term, long-term goals. Short-term goal is benchmarking. A lot of companies that have CX programs in place still are unable to answer questions like, how good is good? Where are we versus our peers? Or when scores go up or down, how worried should we be? How are we doing versus our peers? And short-term goal was for us to be able to measure experience in the same way at the same time across multiple companies so we can understand where we are at in that performance quartile scale. But we want to go beyond the measurement of experience. We want to use the data that we collect to help companies understand what are needle movers versus noise. If you want to improve your experience, if you want to drive customer loyalty and financial impact, where should you focus? CX data and experience data is only the starting point, as Jim will tell us, is not the end point. So the consortium is also there to help companies move on from experience score on to so what? What's the impact? What's the focus? What are the priorities? What are the drivers? And how do we drive impact? And ultimately, our longer term, most ambitious goal is to demonstrate at scale with data that companies that excel in CX also exhibit above average financial returns and performance. So make the case for CX, why it makes sense to invest in customer experience, because it makes good business sense.
And Ricardo, you can't have 53 organizations without some competitors, right?
That's right. Great point, Jim. So a critical element of the consortium is that we strictly follow all antitrust and privacy requirements, right? So the good news is, there are a few good news, actually. One is, as you join the consortium, or any of the consortium members will ever be asked to share who are their customers, what are their customer contacts, or also nobody else other than each individual company will know their ranking and performance in the benchmark. And that's exactly because of what you say, Jim. There are competitors, peer companies, customer suppliers represented in the consortium. So we need to keep very clean and strict boundaries around data protection. The other good news is that there is no cost to join, right? It's there is no intent to monetize the initiative. We all contribute by putting our time and expertise at play, and we all benefit as a return from it by sharing results, knowledge, and ideas.
And I can tell you, I have a lot of clients as well as friends who are part of the consortium, and they get a ton of value as a chance to hear what's happening in the industry. When you have 53 manufacturers together, everybody wants to speak to that group. And so they can be picky on choosing the very best. And so, again, a lot of people get a great benefit. But we're not here today just to advertise the AMCX. Yes, you should join, by the way. But we're going to talk a little bit about what was learned here. And so let's hop into learning a little bit about, sorry, I pressed the wrong button. A little bit about the actual research that was conducted here. Ricardo, tell us a little bit about that. By the way, hi, John. Thanks for commenting that. But Ricardo, tell us a little bit more about the survey that went out.
Yes. As I mentioned before, how do we do the benchmarking? It's a relatively simple idea. Basically, member companies agree to administer the exact same survey, each one to their own individual customer base at the same time. And then we export anonymized results into a common aggregating platform. Qualitrix is supporting very kindly the consortium efforts and is acting as the aggregating platform that brings together all the data. Last year, we completed our benchmark survey. We collected over 7,200 customer responses from all kinds of personas, executives, procurement, manufacturing, supply chain, and so on. And all geographies were covered. So we had those 7,000 plus responses cover all geographic areas, which is another interesting aspect if we have time to talk about it, right? For the ones of you that measure CX in your company in the various geographic areas, I'm sure you have noticed certain areas tend to score higher than other areas from a cultural point of view, just how people interpret and respond to surveys. The value of this geographic benchmark is now you can compare your, Latin America scores with somebody else Latin America, which can be more meaningful comparison than you trying to compare with your North America scores, for example. The survey, it's a shorter survey than a standard relationship survey, 5 minutes or so to complete. And it's really built around 3 areas. One area is most commonly used common benchmark measurements. Think of NPS, ease of doing business, overall satisfaction. We have something around sustainability and something around digital, ability to interact and self-serve digitally. This is because sustainability and digital are big areas of investments for pretty much every manufacturing companies these days. So that's the first area, and also future intent, right? Not just NPS, but also intent to grow. The second area is around rational meeting or rational needs of the customers along the high-level steps of the customer journey, from finding product and solutions to placing orders to account relationship to resolving issues, quality, supply reliability, and so on. And finally, the third dimension is around meeting customer emotional needs. Think like trust, feeling listened and understood. And this is because also, and in large part, thanks to the great research from Jim, we have a lot of evidence now that shows that emotions plays a huge role in decision making, also in B2B. So those are the three areas that the survey is built around, and we collect responses from a variety of personas across all those dimensions. And then we are able to benchmark, do drivers analysis, and identify what are some of the themes.
So the data set is wonderful. The fact that you have at least 1,500 responses from every region in the world, about 2,000 executives. It just was a real pleasure to be able to look into this data. And I'd say probably the most surprising finding was that procurement people have emotions. That right there is a big finding that nobody believes. But we're going to get into more actually the more relevant parts. But that's one that people love noodling on. But let's get a little bit more. Let's start with maybe not what our audience cares about, but our audience's CEOs definitely care about. And that is growth. Now, one of the elements, thanks, Catherine, that was put into the survey is on what is the intent to grow with you? And so what is your client's intent to grow with you? And this is really important. If we look at this research from Gartner, which brought in, they asked CEOs, what are your top 3 initiatives? And then they coded them. So they didn't ask how important is customer experience. They said, what are you working on? What are your big initiatives? And coded them. You see that growth was number 1, 62%. That's actually a 13% growth over the previous version. So growth is on your CEO's minds. It's really what they're focused on. Now, if you go on way down the list to number 8, you'll see the customer is only number 8. Well, how do you grow without customers? Obviously, you need customers, but it paints a picture of your CEO's mindset, that they're hyper-focused on growth. The median tenure for a CEO of a Fortune 500 company is 4.8 years, which means, by definition, half of CEOs don't make it that long. Why don't they make it that long? Because they haven't driven growth, and that's their entire focus. I presented my research a few weeks ago to the CXPA. You might remember I lead research for CXPA, and I lead the research committee. And so I've done 30 interviews with C-suite leaders, and it's the same story. They're all hyper-focused on growth. And so that's what we analyzed against, is what leads somebody to say, I plan to grow with my current provider. Now, unfortunately, according to the XM Institute, only 1 out of 9 programs can actually show that they are able to connect to growth and show the impact to growth or any other financial outcome. So it's a real need in the industry, is how do we connect our work to growth? Well, we had 16 companies all participate. None of them gave me their financials, so I can't connect to actual spending, but we can look at intent to grow here. And so what do we find? We find that the good news, first of all, is that 36% of respondents said they plan to grow with their current provider. 59% say they're going to maintain, keep the spending the same. 5%, unfortunately, plan to decrease with their provider. And so we wanted to understand, what is it that in the customer experience that makes a difference? What is it that will lead somebody to say, yes, I plan to grow with my provider? Is it a rational item? Is it the emotional items? Is it the different roles? What is it that leads somebody to say, I plan to grow with my provider? Well, I gave you a little bit of a sneak peek earlier when I talked about procurement, because it's actually an emotional outcome. The best predictor of a customer's intent to grow can be measured by assessing the level of trust in their supplier. Now, those who've seen me speak before know that I really started coming to this notion of measuring emotions from Dow's work, measuring enjoyability and now confidence. Ricardo spoke at one of my conferences about how confidence predicts spending in the future. And so that was our early indicator that this matters. Now, I get a lot of cross-eyed looks when we talk about trust and other emotions in B2B, but actually it matters even more in B2B than B2C. There's some research recently out from Forrester showing that B2B decision makers are incredibly risk adverse. It takes trust in their provider before they're willing to spend more with them. Yet very few of us are measuring that. So this is a call to measure trust in your customer experience.
And Jimmy, if I can briefly chime in there, because I 100% agree on what you said. For me, it's actually logical if you think about it, right? Think with the difference between B2C, B2B, or consumer scenario versus a B2B scenario, right? Why trust for me, the way I rationalize in my mind, why is trust so important in B2B? Again, think about your consumer. When you buy something, it's typically your personal decision, typically a lower cost item. If you don't like it, you're bad. Maybe you return it, you change it, you buy another one. In B2B, stakes are so much higher. If you get it wrong, you can really create financial damage to your company. You can shut down a plant. You can have product recalls. Potentially, in some cases, your career is stuck, right? So that's why, and for me, this also speaks to why so many of the customer journey in B2B are never 100% digital. They may be digital, start digitally, but ultimately there is always a non-digital part, because that personal validation, am I doing the right decision? Am I looking at this right? Did I miss anything? That reinforcement of trust and confidence that I'm doing the right thing is so important when the stakes are high. So for me, that's, at least in my mind, that I rationalize this finding. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
Makes perfect sense. We had a client which, as part of the Six Sigma efforts, really pushed all their clients to digital only. And we found is they really did lose the trust. There was never a strong relationship. It became very transactional. Multi-million-dollar decisions made transactionally. And so there's certainly a role for analog in the B2B experience to build trust. Now, don't get me wrong. There's also a very key role for digital. You need to really have a balance across them. That balance can be hard to find. So Megan asked, hey, Megan, is it this trust in the product, the business support they'll get? There are multiple types of trust that organizations need, and 100% agree. We did not have a open-ended comment to get to what that is behind. What is it leading it there? But we didn't actually distinguish between different types of trust in this survey. But we are going to tease a little bit ahead that one of the best drivers of trust is the relationship with account management, which suggests a little bit where that trust is coming from. We didn't do a specific drilling down to what trust means. This is a syndicated study, but there is certainly a role in the account rep in creating that trust. So what about trust? What does it matter? Well, here's a 2x2 that really helps. I'm an MBA, have to use a 2x2. It's required by law. What does that mean? Well, we have trust level by intent to grow contract. You can see that when trust is high, only 1% of respondents said they plan to decrease with their provider. When trust is low, 35 did. So a huge difference. So by high and low, what we mean is we had a 5-point scale, and 4 and 5 were above expectations, 1 and 2 were below expectations. So when trust was above expectations, only 1% planned to decrease, whereas 48 planned to increase their spending. When trust is low, you can see 35% plan to decrease, only 19% plan to increase. So it makes a huge difference. It was the top driver for the general population in determining likelihood to spend more or less. Now we'll talk a little bit more about it coming up here. Ricardo will share his experience at Dow, but we see this across the board. As Ricardo referenced, that there's a lot of risk in most B2B decisions. A phone is probably the most expensive purchase we make on an annual or semi-annual or every few years basis, and that might be an $800 decision. The B2B decision can be millions of dollars. As Ricardo said, can threaten your job. That's why trust is so important. As you are consistent in your delivery, as you build relationship, trust increases, which leads your customers to want to spend more with you. Whether that is centralizing more of their existing order with you, or the way I can tell if you have a great customer experience in the B2B world is if your customer calls you and says, I don't know if you do this, but that's a great indication you built the trust of them. They're calling you first. We're going to talk a little about survey makeup in a little bit here, but the concept will go a little bit deeper into what's there. But let's talk a little bit more about the trust factor here. And emotions really do play a role in future intentions. As you can see, this report from the XM Institute is that when the emotional experience is rated highly, 90% of promoters, there's a high correlation to net promoter score. When it's ranked low, only 22% are. Additionally, in our survey, we did find that emotions were the best predictors of a high net promoter score, as well as one of the best predictors of likelihood to spend more. So really, emotions are something that drive both our CX outcomes, but more importantly, the business outcomes. And with specific call out here on executives, I want to talk about. So executives, as we all know, are a little bit different. First of all, they're not as involved with the day-to-day experience. Very few executives are out there, for example, unloading a truck, depending on what you have, or unloading a tanker car. They're not making the orders. They have a little bit different. Trust still matters. Something interesting we found is that my supplier does business the right way was actually more predictable for executives than even trust. And really, if you look at the role of an executive, they're always looking at, do we have the right partners in place? And this is not from the survey. This is just from other work we've done. And we see that some of the things matter here are values, sustainability, how the contract renewal goes, account management. Some of these were in the survey as well. But we find it's a little bit different where trust mattered for everybody. For executives, the question of my supplier does business the right way was the best predictor for them of intent to grow. And so when they said that my supplier does business the right way is above expectations, 63%, almost 2/3, said they plan to grow with their suppliers. I don't know, Ricardo, if you've seen anything similar like that with Dow, I don't think you asked that question, but have you seen anything similar to that about how executives think differently than maybe procurement?
Yes, we do, and the explanation you provide is also what we think is the driver, right? Executives are less exposed to the transactional nature of the relationship, so they are a bit shielded or screened from the day-to-day operational performance that may impact experience more so for people in supply chain, manufacturing, procurement. You still get there through escalation, right? But they're more one step away from that, and therefore, yes, you're absolutely right. They're let's say the way they feel about a supplier has more to do with that alignment of intent, alignment of purpose, long-term partnership. Do they feel they are, as you say, partnering with a company that is providing them the attention, the support, the alignment that they expect? So, yeah, absolutely.
And I want to go a little bit deeper what John talked about. He says he's read about the board of emotions. So those who follow me regularly know this. 6 years ago, I went on a trek to understand what is it about the 1 in 4 programs that can show business value versus the 3 out of 4 customer experience programs that can't. Now that number has not changed. It first came up with Customer Think in 2019. The most recent XM Institute research says the exact same thing, 75% can't show value. The first one was actually connect to financial outcomes, not a surprise. But the second finding I had was that the great B2B programs that can connect to value measure emotions. Because typically your customers' emotions are the best predictor of their behaviors, such as ordering more or less from you, or driving up or driving down cost to serve. So this is not in isolation. I have found in many different contexts that emotions are the best predictor of behaviors, and those behaviors have financial implications. So now, how do we drive that growth? We know that trust and doing business the right way are the best predictors, but what predicts the predictors? Where do we focus on to drive growth? So Ricardo's going to talk a little bit more about that.
Yes, and I'd also love to go back to the question of Megan. of the potentially different type of trust. What drives trust? Because ultimately, trust is more an outcome of doing something good that generates and fuel that trust, right? So what we learn analyzing the data of the consortium benchmark data, but also at Dow specifically, is that one in B2B manufacturing specifically, reliable, consistent supply of high quality products is a huge driver of the experience. And repeated positive experience where you show up, the product shows up at the right time, in the right place, with the right quality, it's a huge enabler for building that trust in your ability to deliver on your commitment. If you miss that foundational expectation, our learning and our data shows that everything else you do in the other parts of the experience, even if you have the best account teams that treat the customer very nicely, if you have nice EH&S support or customer service team, if you miss the point on reliable supply of high quality product, everything else falls apart. If you don't miss the boat and do a right job there, you create the conditions for trust to grow. So that's one dimension, your operational reliability, specifically on product supply and product quality. It's the biggest, fastest way to deliver, to build trust. On another dimension is, Jim mentioned this before, the strength of your account team. How strong is the relationship on a personal level between supplier and customer? And our data and experience points towards saying the stronger that experience, the more you can buy tolerance to fail in the operational part. If your experience and relationship is strong, customers will pardon you more failures on your quality, supply, reliability before they say enough is enough, I'm going to look for somebody else. If your relationship is weak and you start failing on the operational part, then you will see those customers much faster walk away. So at Dow, we have done some of it. I'll talk a bit more later, but translated that operational experience, satisfaction of the operational part with the strength of the account relationship all the way to trust and loyalty and ultimately volume revenue margin. But for me, those were some of the key learning from the benchmark and the data analysis. And what I mentioned before, one of the objectives of the consortium is to help the member understand not just where they are in the benchmark, but where do they need to focus to move next. And again, I can't stress enough, if you're not hitting the bar on quality and supply reliability, you should start there before you start worrying about invoicing or searching for products or your digital commerce platform. That's a key learning from our research.
That's backed up by other research like the Exim Institute, which found that when customers have a high emotional engagement with the brand, this is more on consumer, but I think it applies here. They're about 2/3 are willing to forgive you when there's a problem. But if that just hits neutral, a neutral emotional experience, it drops down to 16%. Negative is even further than that. Seems to be the emotions create this confirmation bias. And think of your favorite brand, or maybe let's use Amazon. If Amazon shows up a day late, you're surprised. That's a big deal because you have such trust in them. They're really good at delivery. More functional trust, but their research from a few years ago shows that they're the second most trusted brand after Apple. If Comcast cancels appointment, shows up a day late, you're like, oh, figures. Because again, you have a more negative, I'm stereotyping, but you have a more negative confirmation bias there. You're assuming negative things happen, they happen, and you assume that. The trust creates a positive or negative confirmation bias so that when things go wrong, they'll forgive you if it's high because they're sure you're going to get better next time, and they won't forgive you if it's low because it seems to fit the pattern. So now we're going to talk about how do we actually activate on this research? How do we use it? Ricardo's going to introduce the model. I'll go a little bit deeper here, but talk about how do you activate the results. Go ahead, Ricardo.
Yes, the starting point, what we encourage consortium members to do is the benchmark data and the survey data from the consortium will give you a good starting point that covers the basics, right? The key elements, the key benchmarking measurements, including in future intent, the emotional needs, rational needs. That's a great starting point. The next step we recommend to do is to match those experience measures with the relevant operational measures that you have to collect. Every member, right, has to collect internally. If you're trying to understand the impact of supply reliability or quality, for example, you want to collect information about your on-time delivery or first-pass quality statistics or customer complaints and so on. And once you have connected those experience measure with operational measures, then you can start looking at, leading, lagging correlation, predictive relationship, and so on. And as you do that, you can bet that you will find areas where you say, I don't have enough. I would like to have this additional information. Maybe I should ask this other question that I didn't ask, or maybe I should actually measure this operational KPI that we are not measuring today. So that's how you go and complement and go back and adjust your measurement systems to validate your hypothesis that you develop. And finally, right, once you have developed your hypotheses, you validate those with the data, then you can really start driving the improvements. And then again, the consortium in this case can help by bringing together the network, right, of people that have gone through those same process. I can tell you, what did you do to improve in this space? What did you learn? What worked? What didn't? But basically, don't be afraid in that last stage to look around, ask for help, and see what has worked elsewhere before you reinvent the wheel. So, Jim, why don't you go one level deeper on those different steps?
Sure. And the key thing is the reason we highlighted there, put it italics on your data. As I mentioned, I've interviewed 30 C-suite interviews in the last few months here, and they are actually very data focused, but they're focused on their data. If you're out there sharing, for example, the watermark study, and I love the watermark study. If you're not familiar with it, it shows how the CX leaders had higher stock increase than CX laggards. It's a great study, but your C-suite doesn't care. They want to know what's happening with your customers and your data. So you can use the consortium to help you as a guide, but you really need to look more at your data. That was another finding I had when I looked at the Rockstar programs, the change makers, I call them, is they were very immersed in their data. Ricardo comes from a supply chain background, so that's how he knows so much about his data. But I found that the best programs are immersed in their data, not their survey data, their operational, behavioral, financial data, starting with financial data, because that's what the executives care about. They care about growth. So you start there. Use the AMCX as a guide for what to look at, but then find your data. And then bring those pieces together, the operational financial data and behavioral as well, to match with the CX. And we see the 4 different types of data here. You could actually add descriptive as well. But what I've found is that most programs will say our net promoter score is 37. That's an increase of 3. A little bit more advanced will say we see that promoters retained at 95% versus detractors retained at 70%. It still doesn't give you much action. But the great programs can say overall, our net revenue retention grew by 3% last year. Net revenue retention is a combination of retention and changes in spending. We find the biggest driver of that is when customers trust us or have confidence. And we find the biggest driver of confidence, for example, is when on-time delivery is above a certain threshold. Back to Megan's comment out there, people don't trust words. They often question actions, but patterns never lie. They're using that on-time delivery to say, can I trust you? Are you the right company? If you want to be a change maker, you've got to bring in that operational data so you can see why are the scores the way they are, or more importantly, why is the changes in spending the way it is, and and use the survey more to tell us why what's happening rather than what's happening. So bring in those different types of data, and then say, I've got the text wrong. Sorry. Add the missing elements. What are we missing here? Bring in that operational behavioral data, and then yes, bring in the. So I messed up slides. But then bring in the partners that you need. And again, AMCX is wonderful. Highly recommend if you're in a manufacturing distribution company, that you join. Again, I get 100% commission because it's free. It's just a great program to look into, so I highly recommend it. It's a way to learn from others what's happening. So again, that model is start with focusing on your data, bring in the different types of data, then add in those missing elements. Like, for example, if you're not measuring trust, well, then bring trust into your measurement, or confidence, but those emotional pieces, and then use external resources to benchmark and improve. But now Ricardo's going to talk a little bit more about how he puts into play, and then we'll move into Q&A. So Ricardo, tell us a little bit more about how Dow uses the AMCX to accelerate your customer experience program.
Yes, one of the things I like, specifically one of the reports or output that I like the most from the benchmark data that we share with the consortium is another 2x2, a quadrant analysis, where we imagine one axis is whether your performance is above or below the benchmark, right? Are you top quartile? Are you bottom quartile? Are you better or worse than your peers, basically? And the other dimension is how important is that specific part of the experience as a driver of the intent to grow or loyalty. If you imagine, right, those two axes, then you can build 4 quadrants, which will tell you if something is very important driver of loyalty and growth, and your performance is below benchmark, meaning you are worse than your peers, that's your focus quadrant, right? That's where you would want to start working on. So you look at what is, in my case, falling in that quadrant. And it could be, again, supply reliability, it could be account relationship strength, it could be trust, whatever element, right, of the experience that falls into that quadrant. So with Dow, we use that approach and look at what fell for Dow in that opportunity quadrant. Highly important as a driver, performance below peers. I think the comparison with peers is important, particularly in moments like this for the chemical industry specifically, where very economically challenged, right? We are in a prolonged trough type of market where cost reduction is king, and companies cannot afford to do a lot of things. Prioritizing where to focus is essential, and also understanding how good is important, because we all know. I'll use the example of on-time delivery. To drive 99% of time delivery is possible. It's going to be very expensive to go from 95 to 99, for example. So the question is it worth it? Am I going to recover all those extra costs in inventory, in logistics that it takes to make that improvement? And that's where the peer benchmarking comes important, because you don't have to be 99. You just need to be better than your competitors, right? So I'm just mentioning this as an example, right? So we started at Dow from looking at what fell in that opportunity quadrant for us, and then combined that operational measurements, and we were able to identify what the impact was of the performance in those opportunity areas into the loyalty profile of our customers, and ultimately in the revenue volume margin growth rates of those customers. So we were able to put a dollar business case behind improving in those opportunity areas. And that, in my case, made the discussion easier, better, to gather internal support and alignment from the people and functions and businesses involved to improve on those pain points, because we were able to show with data that by improving in those areas, then you can drive financial results and a return on those investments. So this is an example of how I think members use and can use the information that we provide. And again, the answer will look different for every consortium member, but the approach that Jim outlined is very similar, whether you are a chemical manufacturer, a chemical distributor, a provider of home furnishing equipment, and other examples of industries that we have represented in the consortium.
That's a great point. This is not only chemical. There's a good number of chemical companies in there, but there are a number of other manufacturers as well, and distributors too, which is great because you get that broad cross-section of different types of organizations. And let's face it, your executives all want to know, how do we compare with others? Now, you can't specifically say how you compare with Dow, but you can say, how do I compare with the overall field, the other 15 organizations that participated? And I find that's really valuable for a lot of companies. So they can say, are our numbers normal? Are they high? Are they low? It really gives you an area that in the past, all we've had to use is some industry NPS scores. But here you can actually show much more granular how, whether it's NPS, whether it's trust, you stack up against others. And so that I know has been another great benefit of being part of this. So now we turn to you. What questions you have about the research, about the AMCX, about, oh, my cat hasn't been here all day. I expected Mothy to come join us. So I guess no questions about Moth, but what questions you have about any of the information we've gone through today? And again, there's a minute delay, so I'm going to let you go ahead and type while we go ahead and we fill the time here. And let's go ahead and, again, put on your question in here about the AMCX.
Yeah, Jim, one more thing I'll mention as we wait for questions to come through is you already say there are companies in the consortium that belong to different industry sectors, always B2B manufacturing, but we have companies that do equipment manufacturing for laboratories, for example, or we have life science companies, or we have, as I said, home furnishing, carpet, door, windows manufacturers. So, and the beauty is that as long as there are at least 3 companies aligned to the same subsector, so we can maintain anonymity of the results for each individual company, we are also generating benchmark by sector. So you can compare your performance not just with the entire consortium population, but you can compare your performance with the companies that belong to your subsector. Again, chemical distribution, chemical manufacturing, equipment manufacturing, whatever those industry sectors might be. So that's another, I think, interesting value of the consortium.
All right, and so we had a question come across here from Lucinda. Ricardo, thanks for presenting on this research at the ACD conference last year. I'd be interested in talking about how we can share this new information on membership. Oh, can we set up some time to chat? So Lucinda would love to get together with you. If others want to sign up, so Lucinda, great to see that. I clearly started reading before I read the whole thing through. If other people want to join, what's the best way to do that, Ricardo?
Yes, I think Jared put a link in the chat before, or you did, Jim. Yes. So on that website, it's a web page that explains some of the information about the consortium. You can also download the data and research that Jim conducted on the data and that we summarized today. And at the end, there is a QR code and a link with the contact us, which basically points you to my email inbox. So that's very easy. If you want to know more or want to join, the only thing you need to do is just contact me on LinkedIn or using those QR codes and links, or drop me an email and we can take it from there. And yes, Lucinda, very nice to hear back from you and happy to chat about providing an update anytime.
Excellent. And if so you're going to be doing the survey again, is that right?
That's right, Jim. We actually are about to launch our 25 benchmark survey. We're targeting at the moment the launch date to be around mid-June. So getting ready to launch, and we have a 30% increase in participation this year versus last year, which was a 50% increase versus the previous year. So it's really nice to see the group evolving and growing as we go.
That's awesome. So if somebody wants to be part of this, you want to be part of the survey so you can get that normative data. How do you compare with others in manufacturing? You want to move quickly. Can they still sign up this year?
You can sign up to join the consortium. It's late to join the benchmark because we are in the final stage of, preparing the survey, getting access to the platform and everything. But you can always join anytime. And then we meet 1 hour every month. As you said earlier, Jim, we have guest speakers every month to cover common interest topics. So you can join and start benefit from those and then join the benchmark next year. And
there's such demand, by the way, to be part of these events that I talk to Ricardo about our research in the C-suite interviews, and I can talk in November. That's how much they're backed up. They have so much content, people want to talk to them because it's such a great group. If you really, really want to be part of the survey this year, I know that Ricardo loves great pasta. So not to cream that, you got to get great pasta. You might have a chance. I don't know, but that's probably your best bet.
And pizza. Yeah. You can buy me cheap. That's what you're saying. Okay.
All right. Or great olive oil too. Looks like we're wrapping up. Not seeing any questions come through. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up here a couple minutes early here. And so I love your feedback on this. And to get the white paper, the AMCX white paper, you can go ahead and scan this QR code or go to that link and type in AMCX and ask you a few questions about whether this presentation today was a good use of your time. And then we'll email you out the white paper. It's also available in that link that we shared. And we'd love your feedback. We've been putting a little bit of hiatus to webinars. We're looking to get them back here. So if you see this of value, let us know in the evaluations. We'd love your feedback. And no, there will be no Net Promoter Score asked in the survey questions, so we can talk about that at another time. So on behalf of Ricardo, the AMCX, this is Jim Tincher. We're going to wrap up today. Thank you all for being part of our report on what makes manufacturing decisions. And love to see you next time, and sign up for the AMCX. Have a great afternoon.